Hi everyone. Actually, today I'm coming at you using something called Screencast-O-Matic. This is a free service where you can actually just record your screen. So I wanted to point it out to you since you might want to use it for your heuristic. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. There are a few documents I'm going to be toggling between today. The first, though, I wanted to start with would be this idea of just giving you an outline of what I'm expecting, giving you some steps, a procedure that you might accomplish. So first, and I'm going to upload, I'll upload this when I'm finished here, so it'll be in the newsfeed along with it. I'm going to go through just the first 5 and then let you read the other. What are your goals is the first thing to think about. Thinking about teacher lingo here, avoid simply citing a standard. To use your words here. So what are your goals as a practitioner of English and language arts? This is sometimes called backwards design, so that a teacher, when planning, clearly understands that they want their student to accomplish certain things, but they're moving towards that in daily lessons, right? So you don't come in all of a sudden and say to your students, this is the ideal text I'd like you to accomplish. You might say that to yourself, but you would never do it to students. Think about your end goals. To whom will you teach the text strategy? So the text and the strategy, and why. Again, you want an appropriate grade level, type of student learner, and a brief explanation of why or how the skill and text relate to your chosen students. Think about my first example. I isolated 8th grade Gen Ed with inclusion students. I talked about their position of kind of being on the brink of post-conventional thinking from concrete to abstract. So you want to connect text to learner, and this can be helped along with reading and rereading Bushman and Haas assignments, those chapters. Number 3, what does your heuristic look like and how does it function? So again, you might want to explain student artifacts. What are the directions? If you have an organizer, if you're having them use Post-its, or if you're going to divide them in groups. Number 4, what would I ask students to do? So here you want to become student-centered with your diction, your word choice. Describe the procedures you would share with students. Include directions if you have them. Explain what you would explain to students, right? Model some examples, etc. And the 5th step here for colloquy 3 heuristic making is what artifact would students create or turn in to you, to their teacher. So what is the concrete thing or things students will produce for your assessment? Sometimes these can be independent, collaborative, they can be group-based, as you'll see in my example I'm going to share with you. You can, if you desire, for colloquy 3, for our purposes, include a small rubric. You don't have to, though, but I want you to have a really clear idea of what students will be turning in or producing for you to grade, since that's always of importance to department chairs and, of course, to administrators, and I hope to you, because you want to have some proof that your students have worked up to your standard as you've led them through a process. So I'm going to, again, upload this document. You'll have it. Don't worry about that. But I wanted to go through it quickly. I'm going to minimize now, and I'm going to maximize the broad-based plan that I shared with you. But before I do that, I'm going to model these 5 steps. So remember, that first one was think about your end goal. I'm going to share with you my end goal for this. I'm really interested when I speak with students, I'm interested in them noting structure, because I think Anderson does a fabulous job as a writer for adolescents and providing us with beautiful structures to study and to foreground, throw into relief for our students. This is something I created. Again, I would not show this to my students at first. I'm talking to you as professionals of basically what amounts to a hero's journey for Melinda Sordino. She begins obviously in the fall, having come just from summer, and it's kind of idyllic last summer and the party. The fall begins, the heart of winter we enter into. Notice here, if you would, how I have in my Glogster here, I've not only used image, but audio, as well as specific quotations from the text that relate specifically, in this case, to winter. I've moved with arrows indicating that my hero's journey begins. The heart of winter ensues. She continues to move throughout winter, and indeed, this is a large portion of the novel, then slowly climbs into spring. Right? There's a lot of imagery surrounded with seeds in the biology class, then moving into or back into summer, right? So ideally, I want my students to recognize the novel's structure, and I want them to begin pinpointing ways in which seasons indicate character growth. I know that, now you know that as well. My students from the get-go are going to only know pieces of what I'd like them to do. So let me go through this. This is my broad-based view of a class project that we would be doing if we studied speak. So that's something I want to kind of keep in mind as we're moving through. Let me move my my video up a bit if I could. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. This is called Thinking Before Speaking, a course project with embedded heuristics. So there's several in here. I've highlighted one for you. Before today, so notice how I'm kind of orienting you, 8th grade inclusion students have brought in a song that reminds them of a single season. The one rule they had is it cannot be a holiday song, since that's just too easy. They're past that. They will have drawn a slip of paper with one of the 4 seasons written on it prior to leaving on a Friday, and they will have had, so notice how I'm orienting you, a weekend to do the following. Find the song, copy down or create a document with lyrics. They could do some other things too. They've got choice. And then, using the song, identify the following. What color the song reminds them of and why. What physical texture to which the song could be compared and why. What emotion the song creates and why. And their favorite portion of the song and why. I'm always asking why. So it's not just what, it's why. So why are they making these contentions? By Wednesday, we will have listened to songs, discussed, and shared during 2 class periods. So thus far, I've outlined for you in a very short period of time my Friday, my weekend, and of course, my Monday and my Tuesday. On a Wednesday then, so after having finished this, what I would call kind of large introduction to abstract thinking, we begin our study of speak. I would not provide a deductive overview or study guide. I would not announce that as our main project we are going to learn how seasons are important. I would not start with definitions of terms. I want to induce thought, not dictate it. What I've learned in my studying and my research and working with interns is that the more we let students explore within boundaries, the better acquisition of knowledge they accomplish. Doesn't mean you don't orchestrate. This is very highly orchestrated. It doesn't mean that we don't plan, but rather we know what our end goal is and we think through specific steps our students need to go in order to reach the ideas that we want to share. And mine, remember, was outlined with my Glogster example I showed. While the text deals with the issue of rape, and while I want to acknowledge this early on in the school year by sending a permission slip and creating individualized assignments that would allow for students to reflect and share difficulties, I must remember overall, and I would caution you here with text like speak, you are an English and language arts teacher, so am I. We are charged with enhancing literacy with each text. Thus, for this and most activities, I teach texts, not issues. To teach texts, I focus a great deal of time on the use of heuristics, called scaffolding if you're thinking of Gallagher, to move, in this case, my 8th grade students, most of whom are just entering the post-conventional stage of development, from concrete to abstract thinking. I can only do this if I focus on Melinda's experience, which does include rape, but it's her experience, avoiding for the most part, for the most of any unit in which I teach speak, the discussion of how rape is bad or rape shouldn't happen. Guess what? Our students know this. It is in reading Melinda's story that they come to understand what they have already heard in a more intimate way. Thus, you and I must commit to teaching Melinda's story with a focus on Anderson's art. Again, notice how I've already said I would provide individualized activities should any student become triggered or bothered. You would involve, obviously, then not just parents, but also you would involve guidance counselors and things of that nature. So it's not a health class, but it has elements in which, should a student have trouble, you can help them. To begin this project, then, I would pre-plan the day before the unit begins, labeling each of the 4 walls: summer, fall, spring, and winter. In a small classroom, I could improvise and use a circle divided into quadrants if I needed to. I would separate my students into season scholars groups, get it? Probably ending up with 2 small groups per season. While we read the novel, we have to do so in class because of budgetary concerns, we will not only examine narrative and literary devices along with any language, but each team will be charged with taking notes of any page on which their season is referenced. To do this without large distraction, each day students will be given a pad of Post-its upon entrance into the class. When they hear a season or a passage in which a season is mentioned or referenced, they're asked to write down the page number on a single Post-it. Sometimes I might enter in and say, hey, there's a really great example here on this page for my spring group. So I might enter in and kind of poke at them to get them to write things down. Most students are really going to take to this, though. They desire to find their 3 Post-its and then they can just listen. At the end of each class period in which we have accomplished reading, my seasoned scholars will slap at least 3 of their Post-its with page numbers on them to their assigned wall, making sure not to duplicate page numbers too often. Once we finish the tale, or if they get bored and ennui sets in, I will point out that we have been close reading the text for a single element. As a matter of fact, at the very end of this, guys, your students will be surrounded by textual evidence, right? So it begins to be a really tactile exercise in close reading. You could even use different colors for different periods if you're working, if you teach this 4 times a day, right? I would also from time to time ask leading questions that deal with how Melinda might feel or look in a chapter, especially when or as these attributes connect to seasons. We would move on then to providing time for them to isolate. So each group would isolate the best or favorite references to their group season. They would do this by using Post-its still on the wall to look back at, read through, and discuss. So we're even getting more concentrated and myopic with our reading. As they work, I and/or the collab teacher would circulate to discuss why passages they choose are the best. And then your job always then is the facilitator to lead groups through the process, talking with each about how to choose the best evidence, why their choices work as best evidence, etc. Finally, they enter in the design phase in which they decorate their wall space. And then I'm going to skip down here. Slowly, I would introduce to each group how a season connects with Melinda. So going back to my Glogster example, foregrounding that more and more as I question and talk with them. I might even draw Melinda on the board once they are finished with their wall and connect Melinda. Sometimes I could do this very physically with a piece of yarn to the season, provoking them to think even more about how she connects, how her growth connects to the season. Here at the bottom, I've provided some wrap-up ideas. Remember, my overall goal is to illustrate Melinda's growth. This is my goal that I've chosen with my Glogster as she goes through the literal seasons of a year, but also, this is more importantly, also seasons of change in her life as she handles the trauma inflicted upon her. I orchestrate a project, right? I've started from that very first weekend broad-based project that was audiovisual, tactile, and writing focused, to doing some close reading as students do their first read, to doing more close reading as they examine their data, and then of course to designing their wall that's close reading and visual, and then of course I would infuse my work with them with the notion that the seasons are connected to Melinda. Here's what I would turn in, folks, or what I would, expect students to turn in. Post-its, student questions, finished wall, and later I could even look ahead to a short essay comparing Melinda at a certain point of her journey to their assigned season, right? So there's lots of places where I can do some individual grading, some group grading, the finished wall, and then the essay, which would be individual as well. I've highlighted this blue up here because that's one heuristic, right? Study that. That's one embedded heuristic within this much larger plan. You could do something like this if you chose to do it.